Alright, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today I've got my meta predictions for the Lille Regional Championships. It is the next big tournament after Milwaukee, where we have had a bit of a meta shift and a bit of a shakeup in the format. I think decks are now going to have to be built a little bit differently. More things have to be kept in mind now when deck building. I think people are going to have to adapt to what is getting bigger and more popular right now within the current format. I'm excited to talk about all that in this video. Again, Lille is tomorrow, so I'm excited to get my predictions out here. Also, I do have a tier list and total meta percentage that I'm going to be discussing in this video too, which I am pretty excited for. If y'all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. As always, we're on the road to 26K subscribers. And let me know what your predictions are for Lille Regionals. What do you think could win the tournament now that we've had some results in from Milwaukee and everything? So, starting off, obviously we got to talk about Gardevoir. It's still the BDIF right now. Gardevoir is still the best deck in the format. Now, there's two ways you can play Gardevoir right now that really make the most sense. I really think Jellicent Guardi is still strong. Your Charizard matchup is slightly better than I would even say Turbo Guardi to a degree, just because at least you have the Jellicent and the Frillish to try to item lock and Devo your opponent. I think Guardi Jelly will still be fairly popular. I still expect this deck to show up in numbers, but I think the better way to play Guardi right now is actually going to be Gustavo Watto's build here with the Drifloon and the Mega Gardevoir. So this build, in my opinion, has the best matchup against the cornerstone Kangaskhan Absol deck. Like, the Absol Kangaskhan deck is the new big bad of the format. I think that deck is here to stay. It's going to be popular in Lille. We'll talk about that in a sec. And I think that Guardi needs to figure out how to beat that. I don't think Gardevoir Jellicent gets the job done. Guardi Jelly does not seem very favored against Kangaskhan Absol. Guardi with Drifloon and Mega Gardevoir, however, the matchup actually seems favored for Gardevoir, even with the threat of Mega Absol. I think the matchup is fairly close, and I think that if you're going to play Guardi this weekend, I think you got to try to adapt and play something like Drifloon in your deck. You don't have to exactly play Gustavo Watto 60, even though I actually think it's pretty solid and perfect, albeit maybe you could put a Turo in the deck or something. But overall, I think that this is the best version of Guardi you can play right now. You probably... I don't know if you have to play Mew, because he does have the nukes in the deck with Guardi and Drifloon. You can still probably put a Mew in here if you wanted to, but I think that this approach is the best way to play Guardi. I think Guardi needs to play some kind of big, heavy hitter nuke option like the Drifloon, like the Mega Gardevoir. If you're going to beat these bigger Pokemon like the Kangaskhan's, even Charizard to a degree, sometimes being able to just knock out a Charizard out of nowhere with Drifloon or Guardi is really, really powerful. So this is probably the best way to play Guardi. And I think that if we're going to see Gardevoir win Lille, it's probably going to be some kind of version like this with Drifloon and or Mega Gardevoir in it, just because you need that firepower against the Tord deck. All right, next up is Charizard. We did see Charizard win Milwaukee. Charizard is still very favored for Lille. I would expect this deck to also show up pretty nicely. I know Charizard has done well in EU in the past before, so I wouldn't be surprised if somebody made it to the finals. Again, with Charizard, good chance we'll see at least one or two in the top 8 of Lille. Honestly, I don't know if you really need to change anything about Jackson's list. I know he's like posted about using the Ho-Oh in the deck from Surging Sparks to give you a better attacker against Cornerstone. So maybe the cut is just take out Chi-Yu, add in the Ho-Oh into the deck. The Klefki seems really good still for the Dusknoir, and Klefki actually has a lot of universally good things it can do, especially if maybe we do start seeing more Drifloon pop up again in Gardevoir. So I do like Charizard still. It's another deck that I would very much consider playing this weekend if I was going to Lille. This deck seems very broken still. Charizard still looks like it's one of the best decks you can play right now in our current standard format. And I wouldn't be surprised if it made it to finals. And now let's talk about the Tord deck, the Kangaskhan Absol deck. This deck is going to show up in numbers, I think. It's going to be fairly popular in Lille, mainly because the deck is still very powerful. And even though the cat's out of the bag, it's discovered, people are now going to start building their decks in preparation for this deck. Like I said, Guardi might start playing more Drifloons. We might start seeing other tech cards pop up in other archetypes to counter stuff like Cornerstone a bit more easily. Fighting types might actually have a bigger presence this tournament also potentially. So this deck is going to be countered, but I think this deck is still very powerful regardless. Personally, if I was playing this deck, I would consider adding one TM Devo in the deck. Outside of that, I think this deck is pretty good in the format right now still. And I would expect this deck to be popular. Probably going to make top 8. I know there's probably going to be some players who are going to bring it. Maybe Tord did like an updated list on his Metafy, which people will start playing that build to this tournament. So I would expect Kanga Absol to be popular and make the top 8 once again. And then we got to talk about Dragapult, which definitely is falling down a little bit. I think Dragapult is going to suffer just because Guardi's still going to be big. The Kanga Absol deck is still going to be big. But I will say this, Dragapult is going to feast on Charizard, and Charizard isn't going anywhere. Charizard will be popular at this tournament. I would expect it to be played by some big players. Dragapult Dusknoir actually feels like still a decent deck. It's another deck that I know it is kind of getting pushed out of the meta slowly. it's still a deck that's powerful enough to make it far in a tournament and make top 8. Wouldn't be surprised if maybe one Dragapult does for make top 8. It's still like a good deck, and you are benefiting from the popularity and rise of Charizard for this tournament. Grimmsnarl is another sneaky deck that I really like right now. It does have a good matchup versus Charizard. You're okay in a Guardi. I mean, the Guardi matchup is beatable for sure. You are playing a dark deck after all. You're good into some other decks, but you are going to struggle a little bit against some of the big stuff like Joltic, Kangaskhan Absol. I actually don't think is a favorite matchup. You might have to figure out a way to beat Kanga Absol a bit more easily with this deck. That matchup seems pretty bad. And then also, you're going to struggle a little bit in Ceruledge and Gholdengo, but, I mean, you're taking a good matchup versus Zard and Deepult, and your Guardi matchup isn't terrible. If you can maybe figure out a better line against the Kanga Absol deck, this deck actually seems like a decent call for this tournament. So I would expect Grimmsnarl to be okay. I don't think it's going to be very popular. I know it did get top 8 in Milwaukee, which is good, but I don't think this deck will be that popular. Just because I think some people are going to be scared of playing it, even though it actually is a decent deck. It's just, you have to figure out a good way to deal with that Kangaskhan Absol deck. That matchup seems pretty unwinnable. Next up is Ceruledge. This deck's going to be popular. It's the best all-you-can-do, big, go-fast type deck, and Ceruledge does it the best out of any deck right now. Also, just got a good matchup versus Kangaskhan Absol, which is a bonus, right? Though you may want to play more Jet Energies, but this is the highest placing build from Milwaukee. Yeah, I think Ceruledge is good. It's strong. Like I said, good matchup versus Kanga Absol is not a bad thing. Your Guardi matchup might get a bit more shakier, though. If Gardevoir does start playing Drifloon again, that actually gets a bit problematic for Ceruledge altogether. But I still think the deck is pretty solid all around, and I think it's good. I like the idea of maybe playing Jamming Tower in the Ledge this weekend. If I was playing Ceruledge, I would consider running one copy of Jamming Tower, or two even, in my list this weekend, just because of the presence of tools like Bravery Charms, which is pretty important. Gholdengo is also very good. I actually think the idea of playing Gholdengo with Mega Lucario is kind of genius, because Gholdengo rocks is not bad against a lot of decks, but the Lucario line really does fix your matchup against Kangaskhan Absol quite a bit. It actually makes it favored for you, because like the Cornerstone doesn't really do anything against Lucario, and then Lucario can also beat Kangaskhan up pretty easily, and you can kill the Absol with like Gholdengo. You're basically one-shotting the Megas while they're trying to wall you off. With Cornerstone, you just have this big Lucario that deals with it. Also, they can't really trap you. You play 3 switching cards in total, 2 Turo, 1 switch. Like that Baby Yveltal is just not getting enough work in. Gholdengo does seem very good. My one complaint with the deck is that it's not great into Charizard. Even with the rocks, honestly the Mega Lucario, the matchup is still a little it's like a little unfavored in my opinion, just because they have Chi-Yu, and if they're playing Ho-Oh, I guess it's a bit easier to deal with than Chi-Yu. Ho-Oh is a little bit more harder to manage, because you actually have the 2 prizes on the board, specifically a Charizard, in order for that card to work. But they're still playing Chi-Yu, not a good time. But yeah, I like Gholdengo a lot. I will say this. I think Guardi Jelly is going to slip in play a little bit. I would expect Turbo Guardi builds to be more common this weekend. This deck doesn't do too good against Gholdengo Jellicent. You actually probably just lose to Frillish. You don't even have to get Jellicent. They can beat you with just Frillish. They can Frillish shuffle you. But the Turbo Guardi list does seem pretty good for this deck, because like you can tech in a Tool Scrapper if you want to deal with Drifloon. Yeah, honestly, Gholdengo Lucario looks like a pretty good play for this weekend. If I was going to Lille, this would be something that I would consider running myself. I would probably just try to fit a Tool Scrapper in this build specifically, and I think we call it a day. Next up is Terabox. Another deck that I think is fairly well positioned, but nothing too crazy. It's not really doing anything like insane right now. In fact, I think that you have to adapt a little bit. You probably have to start teching in Jamming Tower in this deck if you want to deal with the likes of the Kangaskhan Absol deck, which I think Alex Shemansky, who played this deck, even said, like, I wish we played Jamming Tower this weekend for that matchup, because then it would have been a lot easier. So Flareon's a good deck. I like it. I think it's a decent play for this weekend. Or not Flareon, Terabox, I should say, is really good. But that brings me to the next point. What about Flareon? Flareon's pretty good, too. I think it's worse than Terabox, but it's still, like, decent. You got the addition of Sylveon, which isn't terrible right now. I don't think Sylveon does anything, like, super crazy, but I think Flareon is still, like, a decent deck, and there's enough people that enjoy playing Flareon that I would expect a couple to make day 2. It is a deck that, if the right player plays it, it definitely can go pretty far in a tournament. Same thing with Terabox, obviously. Next up, I want to talk about Joltic Toolbox, which I think actually is a lot stronger for this weekend than a lot of people think, mainly because this deck has a really good matchup versus Kangaskhan Absol. Honestly, I don't even think your Charizard matchup is that bad either. Like, I think that Joltic Box is in a pretty good spot for this weekend. If you want to play Joltic Box, this might actually be the best tournament to play it to. in my opinion. Now, Gardevoir will be the only problem for this deck. Obviously, the Turbo Guardis aren't going to be that easy to deal with. But I still think this deck is well positioned for this weekend. And like I said, if you want to play Joltic Box to a tournament, I think playing it to Lille is not a bad thing. I really like Diego Casaraga's list. I think it's actually pretty perfect for this format. There's really not much you can change about his list. Like, it seems like the best way to play a Joltic Box deck right now. And I think with the rise of Kangaskhan Absol, this deck seems pretty good for that deck specifically. Zoroark always will have its warriors. It is a deck that beats Guardi, though I will say, though, like I said, if Guardi Jelly is starting to slip away in popularity, then I do expect Zoroark to also get slightly weaker. Zoroark's matchup against Guardi Jelly is phenomenal. Its matchup against Turbo Guardi with Drifloons and stuff, not so good. That matchup is actually a little bit harder to beat. So Zoroark isn't perfect right now. It really does farm Gardevoir Jellicent, but if we, like I said, start seeing Guardi Jelly slip and play a little bit, in favor of these other faster Guardi lists, this deck gets a little bit worse in my opinion. So it's not a perfect deck right now. I mean, you could always play Zoroark with like a Tool Scrapper to beat Guardi Drifloon, I guess. If you really wanted to go a little greedy, you could. But I think the matchup is still unfavored. It's not great. But I do think Zoroark is still a good deck that a few players will make day 2 with and do well with. And maybe top 8, we'll see. It does struggle a lot against Kangaskhan Absol. I think you have to play something like the Okie Dokie in the deck to beat that deck. Raging Bolt is a deck that I think is not great at the moment. But I will say this, it does have a good matchup versus Kangaskhan Absol, which is the only thing that carries this deck from being completely unplayable. Because this deck, in my opinion, would be unplayable if Kangaskhan Absol wasn't a good matchup. Because, like, it just doesn't really do anything crazy right now. Like, you're not beating Gardevoir. Dragapult is, like, good, but Dragapult's play is slipping a little bit. Also, Charizard is not a good match for this deck either. So your matchup spread is getting a lot thinner. But thankfully, Kangaskhan Absol came around to say, hey, you know what? There's a good matchup on the board. So I like Raging Bolt just for this tournament specifically, just because it can actually beat Kangaskhan Absol. But it's still not like a fantastic or phenomenal deck. I want to talk about Dragapult Charizard. This is what I played in Milwaukee. This is the list that I played. If I was playing Dragapult Charizard to Lille, I would probably just slim down the Pult line. I would go down to a 3-3-1 line of Dragapult. I would try to fit in either a Jamming Tower or a Tool Scrapper, and I would probably play... I would honestly consider playing one switch. I would go to a 4th Ultra Ball. That's really about it, and then you can kind of find a flex spot. I definitely think to change anything about this list, it would be to slim down the Pult line and then maybe add in second TM Evo, add in a tool removal card for sure, like a Jamming Tower or a Tool Scrapper. Yeah, I like Pulsar. Like, I played it in Milwaukee. I'd consider running back to Lille also. This deck's pretty cool. Next up is the Stolly type decks. Let's start off with Crustle. Crustle's still good. It's still a well-positioned like type deck where people just are not respecting it, and that's a good thing for Crustle. Obviously, you're taking that bad Guardi matchup. You can play the Sudowoodo if you want, but if, I don't know, Guardi cuts me for some reason, then the Sudowoodo does get a lot worse. But yeah, Crustle's still pretty solid. I definitely don't think this deck is in a bad spot still for this weekend. It'll still make day 2. People are still going to play Crustle regardless of whether or not you say that it doesn't beat Gardevoir. Charizard may be a little scary, especially if they're playing Ho-Oh now. Ho-Oh becomes a lot harder to deal with because that's just an easier way to kill Crustle. Kangaskhan Buffalon is also not a bad deck, in my opinion. You can actually stand up to some of these bigger wall breaker decks, apart from the fighting archetypes, obviously. But Kangaskhan Buffalon's actually not bad. It's a deck that I kind of want to experiment with a little bit further, because I think the deck's actually kind of decent. It is about dodging and weaving some of the more harder matchups. But I think Kangaskhan Buffalon's actually not a bad deck, in my opinion, right now, in our current format. Control is interesting. I'm sure we'll see some control decks do good in Lille because people love their control. There are control players that will probably be there that will cook up a control contraption. Control is good. We saw it have a good performance in Milwaukee. I don't see why it's not going to do good going forward. It's still probably going to be pretty solid. It just maybe makes a few innovations. And control's pretty chilling. So definitely wouldn't be surprised if we saw more control going forward by the control players. Because it feels like control's finally back in the format. Could make another top 32, top 16 run. Ho Armor Rouge is another deck that I think is kind of underrated right now. I don't think the deck is, like, phenomenal, but it is a pretty fast, hard-hitting deck. I think you have a good matchup versus Kangaskhan Absol, and you can kind of just run things off the board with Wellspring and Iron Hands. So that's cool. You get to be an Iron Hands Wellspring deck while also taking a good matchup against Kangaskhan Absol. Your Charizard matchup might be a little shaky, though, if you don't run them off the board with Wellspring. If they're playing Shaman, then it's obviously not very good. But Ho Armor Rouge is a deck that I like. I always keep my eye on this deck, just because it's a cool deck that I think always can do well. Maybe a top 32 run, right? Archelodon almost got top 8 in Brazil, Belo Horizonte. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody played it again, did well with it. It's, like, not terrible. The Mawile does add a lot of power to the deck and helps you a lot against the Absol deck. So I like Archelodon still. You could see a couple do well at Lille. I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen. Garchomp is interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about fighting decks now. Fighting types actually seem to be decent just because of the rise of the Kangaskhan decks. Garchomp does have a good matchup against Kangaskhan Absol. That matchup is fairly solid. You do have to play switches in your deck, though, if you want to beat that matchup consistently, because they can win by evil talling you. So if you're going to play Garchomp this weekend, I think you have to play at least 2 switch in your deck to beat Kangaskhan Absol. But Garchomp does have a good matchup versus Kanga Absol, which is a very good reason to play this deck. It's also just not a bad deck in general. I think it's actually better than Lucario. Mega Lucario is still a great deck. It actually takes a lot of good matchups across the board that you just literally don't beat Gardevoir. And, like, if you're trying to win a tournament, you're just not beating Gardevoir. But I think Lucario is a very powerful archetype. It does farm Kangaskhan Absol pretty easily. That matchup is really hard to lose to, but you're just not beating Gardevoir. Like, even Charizard, in my opinion, isn't perfect either of the matchup. That matchup seems pretty difficult, too. But, yeah, I think Mega Lucario is still decent for this tournament. It's just, if you're trying to win it, like, you're just going to hit too many Gardevoirs. You're just trying to dodge Guardi. But it is another fighting deck that I think could become a little bit stronger, much like Garchomp. If I'm going to play a fighting deck, though, I would rather play Garchomp over Lucario, but that's just me. I want to talk about Mega Manectric, another deck that I think is surprisingly underrated right now. We actually saw it have a decent run in Milwaukee day 1. So maybe somebody will run it back and try it again in Lille, especially if Guardi Jelly's on the downswing. It's better for this deck because you can actually use Generator. The only item locking deck at that point is literally just Budu and Dragapult, which is fine with me. So I think Mega Man Miraidon is something worth looking into right now. It's not a terrible deck. You have a really good Tord matchup because Mega Manectric farms that deck completely, in my opinion. It's just not a bad time to play this deck. And then I want to talk about Venusaur. Really cool deck that got day 2 in Milwaukee. Everyone loves Mega Venusaur Meganium right now. I know this is a deck people want to see succeed. I don't think the deck is, like, insanely broken or anything. It's, like, a perfectly fine and decent deck. I think it's good. Not bad at all. Hopefully we see more of these in day 2 in Milwaukee, or in Lille, sorry. I want to highlight Moon for a sec. This deck deceivingly has a decent matchup in a Guardi and a decent matchup into Tord box, the Kangaskhan Absol deck. It doesn't seem like a bad matchup. And, I mean, the ability to donk your opponent isn't terrible right now. Not a lot of decks really respecting the ability to donk. Every deck's going second. So Turbo Moon doesn't seem like a bad deck for this tournament. It's something that I would maybe, if I had time to put in this deck, I would consider looking into it for Lille. It doesn't seem terrible. It beats Control, which is good. You beat a lot of stuff. You need to play Enhanced Hammer, though, in Moon. If you're going to play Moon this weekend, you got to play at least 2 hammers. Finally, let's just mention Alakazam. This deck is lit. I want to see it succeed. I want to see it do well. I'm going to just say that, somebody do well with Alakazam and Lille. I would love to see that. It would just be pretty dope if that happens. The stars got to align. That's my wild card pick for this video. My 2 wild card picks would be Moon and Alakazam, but specifically these 2. All right, let's talk about my prediction tier list thing here. So I still have Gardevoir in S tier alongside Guardi Jelly. Those are the 2 S tier decks right now. I do want to highlight Charizard, though, as an S tier deck. I think Charizard is still really, really good. This is, like, the only other, like, broken deck that I would justify playing the tournament over, like, Guardi. Like, if I'm somebody who wants to play the best deck in the room, has the best chance of winning the tournament, it would either be Guardi or Charizard. Both these decks are good. Charizard, great matchup in a Gardevoir. A tier, I think it's just, like, full of these, like, pretty powerful decks that do a lot. Like, Absol Kanga's obviously an A tier. It could, I mean, I can't really justify putting an S tier now that the cat's out of the bag. But Kanga Absol in A tier, Grimm in A tier, Deepult in A tier, Ceruledge, Gholdengo in A tier. Because then these decks are pretty solid. And then B tier is just kind of these type of decks where they're good, but they're not, like, perfect, and they obviously do have shaky matchups in the Guardi sometimes. But I like everything in A tier for sure. Like, everything in A tier realistically actually can be Gardevoir and Charizard. So I like these 2. I like this being the A tier and that being the S tier. That's my mini tier list for Lille. I never did a tier list video post Milwaukee, but this is what my, like, base tier list would look like. And everything else I'd put in C tier probably, in my opinion, if I was doing the rest of the tier list. All right, let's talk about meta percentages. So Guardi in general, like, not counting Guardi Jelly, Guardi will be like 14% of the room if we're combining both Gardevoir decks together. It'll be like 14 to 15% of the room. Charizard will probably also be around like that 15%. Charizard winning a regional is big, and obviously it has an appealing matchup against Gardevoir. A lot of people are going to like that when trying to figure out what they want to play for this tournament. They're going to pick Charizard. So Charizard, Pidgeot, Guardi will both be fairly popular. It'll be one of these 2 decks as most played deck. I don't know which one it'll be. I would favor Gardevoir first because there's more variants of it and they can clump together for a higher percentage. In fact, actually, I should probably bump Guardi up to like a 16% or even a 17% meta share, where Charizard is probably going to sit around that 14%. I can see Kanga Absol being in that like 12 to 11% also. Just, it's a new, exciting deck. People want to play it. It's good. Tord played it. Obviously, there's Tord Metafy, which will help boost this deck's popularity. I like this deck being 12% of the meta Polnor will probably be around like 9%. The deck will dip a little bit, and people are just scared to play it, obviously, but Polnor is still good. And like I said, you do have an appealing matchup against Charizard. Ceruledge might be around 10%. It's like the Raging Bolt effect of like the past formats where it's the strongest and fastest deck in the format. It's easy to play. People like easy to play fast, hard-hitting decks that also happen to beat some of the best decks right now. Dengo will be like probably a 7 or 8. I'll go 9% on Gholdengo. I don't know. I can't see Gholdengo being 10%. The deck's pretty good, though. But I think people are right now favoring Ceruledge over Dengos. That's why. Actually, you know what? Ceruledge probably should be 11%. Now that I think about it. It's definitely an 11%er. And honestly, Polnor should probably be like 8%. No, actually, I think 9 is fine. People will just play Polnor no matter what. Even if the deck doesn't look well positioned to a tournament, people are going to play it. And I also think that boost of Charizard's popularity will help keep the deck not too low. Because otherwise, if Charizard didn't win Milwaukee, we just saw Guardi win once again, I would have maybe put Dragapult at like a 7 to 8% deck. Raging or Grimmsnarl, I'll put around 7%, maybe even 6%. I don't think Grim will be that popular. I think its play rate is going to shrink a little bit. Though it's definitely not a bad deck for this tournament. Terabox, probably around 4%. Raging Bolt, I'll put around 5%. Zoroark, 2%. Control, 2%. Joltic Box, I'll give to a 4 or 3%er. I'll give it a 3%er. Then, you can't really see this here. We've got the rest of the meta percentages. So we have 94%, and then I would say 6% other? 7 to 6% other. So something else needs to drop a tier. I gotta decrease. Maybe Grimmsnarl 5%. 7% other does seem a little bit more accurate, in my opinion, because there are a lot of other decks you can play right now. Maybe even 10% other, to be honest. Maybe I overrated a different deck, but this is like a pretty fair, accurate. Maybe we can bump Gholdengo down to an 8%, actually. Dengo 8%. 8% other. Because like there's so many other things you can play right now where it's like there's got to be room for like an other category to at least be fairly big. So I think 8% other makes a little bit more sense. But there you go. That is my predictions for Lille. Again, I think the decks realistically that'll win the tournament is Guardi or Charizard. I do expect a lot of Tord Pile to do well. Ceruledge looking pretty good. Dragapult still doing good. Like any of the decks that I put in A or S tier are going to make top 8 probably. Have a good chance of doing well. I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen. But let's be real. Guardi might win the tournament again. It's going to happen. And I think Guardi with Drifloon / Mega Guardi is the best way to play Guardi going into this weekend. That'll be for me for my med predictions for the Lille Regional Championships. Cannot wait to watch it. I'm excited to see what does well, see what Europe cooks up, and give us some preparation for the next upcoming regionals in Las Vegas and whatnot. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know your predictions in the comment section below. Catch y'all later. Bye-bye.